Welcome, viewers, to the Insight Interviews podcast, a series of insightful episodes where we interview various scholars in the field of Islamic and religious studies to discover their journey in Islamic studies and also take a deep dive into the scholarship that they have produced over the years. If you're interested in checking us out, we are available on our website, of course, on YouTube and on various platforms such as Apple Podcasts and so on and so forth. Today, we are honored and pleased to have our guest, Dr. Tahera Qutbuddin from Oxford University. She is the Abdulaziz Saud AlBabtain Laudian Professor of Arabic at the University of Oxford. Prior to that, she was a professor at the University of Chicago for 2 decades and has also taught at Yale and the University of Utah. She earned her PhD from Harvard University and has studied previously in Egypt as well. She is a renowned author who has many articles in the field of Arabic literature, Islamic studies, and has particularly published several books with Brill Publications. The most recent of them is, of course, the award-winning translation of the Nahj al-Balagha, which is the kalam and the words of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib. And today we're going to dive into that with you, Doctor. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get started. I have so many other questions I want to ask about your career and your journey, which is remarkable. But let's get started with your most recent magnum opus, which is the Nahj al-Balagha. I think it's, at least in the edition I have, it's 1,000+ pages, the printed edition. It's quite a tome. In taking a look at it, it's quite obvious that this is a critical edition, first of all. It's not only a translation, it is a critical edition. It has an extensive introduction, extensive notes. It's really an incredible work. Tell us a little bit about your journey to the Nahj, and then I have some other follow-up questions about that. But let's begin with the journey to this book.
Yeah. No, I feel so blessed, Vinay, to have had the opportunity to work on the kalam of Amir Mu'mineen throughout my life, and particularly in the last decade. So I spent so many of my waking hours reading, studying, writing on, and disseminating the teachings and the eloquence of Imam Ali. It's been a lifelong journey. So it started with, when I was very young, growing up under the loving care of my parents in India, and my father, Sayyidina Tahera Qutbuddin, would teach us kalam hikmah from the Nahj al-Balagha. And I remember, they're kind of ingrained in my memory. Al-ilmu wirathatun karima, al-qana'atu kanzun la tanfad, and so on. And I over the years, I continued to engage with the Imam's teachings and khutbahs. I started, I wanted to write my PhD dissertation on Nahj al-Balagha. I had written my MA thesis at Ain Shams on Nahj al-Balagha. And then I thought, okay, this is a natural continuation. Then I actually very soon realized that was very presumptuous on my part. Mm-hmm. It's a very complex topic and vast topic. And I said, I need to work slowly up toward this kind of goal. Work on other things, smaller things, more focused aspects, until I reach a stage where I feel comfortable kind of addressing this big challenge. So finally, in the last 10 years, I've been collecting manuscripts for the past 30 years. Roy Muttahida, Professor Muttahide at Harvard, one day casually showed me this Marashi manuscript, a facsimile edition that he'd received in the mail. And I said, oh, can I get a copy? And he said, here's the address, you can write to them. So that was my first kind of actual manuscript. And then I've been working on and off on the Kalam of Ali. At some point, I started writing a monograph on Ali after my first book, the Mu'ayyad Shirazi Da'wa poetry book. So I started writing working on kind of a plan for Nahj al-Balagha, or for not Nahj al-Balagha specifically only, but on Imam Ali's teachings and life and so on. And I was trying to find an analytical lens or angle to address this vast body of material. And I thought, as I read about the major genre in Nahj al-Balagha, which is that of khutbah, oration, I realized that there was nothing that had been done really intensively in Western academia on khataba at all, which was very surprising to me because it's the major genre, prose genre of the early times. And so I started working on that. Meanwhile, I was asked by a classmate, so a student of Wolfhard Heinrichs was our advisor, to write a piece in his Festschrift on a term that I would pick from classical Arabic literature from that library. And I said, of course, khutbah. So I thought I'd write up like a 5-page introduction that would lead to my monograph, but then that turned into a 100-page article in the Festschrift, and that even then I thought this is just scratching the surface. So that led into the book on Arabic oration, and I can talk about that more, but I think I want to focus right now on Nahj. So then when I finished that, I kind of came back full time and full steam to Nahj al-Balagha. Also, during that journey, all these decades, I've also translated, as you know, some other works, and that also was really helpful in kind of getting a sense and getting myself trained to work on this much more complex text, which is the Nahj al-Balagha. I edited previous works, so now this editing was also much more complex, and the translation was also much more complex. But I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer more questions about it. I just want to say though that I feel really happy to have done it. I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to do it, and I think, I've done various things in my life, in my academic publishing career, but for me, this is the one that's closest to my heart. They're all close to my heart, and I only work on things that I'm passionate about and that are fulfilling and meaningful to me. But this one is, without question, the most meaningful, and I'm really, really happy to have been blessed with the opportunity.
That's wonderful. Walk us through the editing stage. I think this is as myself, someone who edits manuscripts, or at least works with them. I don't say I'd edit them. I'd say I work with them quite a bit in my field of Islamic studies. They're not easy. They're written in archaic writing very often, and they're difficult to work with. So I guess my question is of two parts. One, what was the main manuscript, the base manuscript that you chose to use for the Nahj? Usually there's an asl you use, and then you use that and you compare it. That will be the one that you type up, and then you compare it to the other ones. So what was that manuscript? Maybe describe it for us, its provenance or where it's from. And then secondly, the process of deciphering the orthography and the writing.
Yeah. I enjoy editing very much. It's a process of discovery, right? And then some days you've been kind of trying to get a manuscript for a long time, and it pops up in your email, you get the PDF, and it's like, alhamdulillah, it just brings a smile to your face. So there are so many aspects to editing, but it's all very joyous. It's also very laborious in terms of strain on your eyes. So as you say, that writings are, sometimes the handwriting is hard to decipher. And also with old manuscripts, there are lacunae, there are gaps, there's water damage. Sometimes some khutbahs in one manuscript are in another place in another manuscript. Just trying to find everything, and kind of if you're dealing with raw manuscripts.
To navigate your way through it.
Exactly, right? So the nice thing in this day and age is, like, especially for your eyes, you can kind of enlarge things. Previously, I still do that sometimes, use a magnifying glass to kind of peer at something and try to figure out, is this a fa or a wow, or what is it exactly, or is it a meme? But with online, you can make things bigger, and that's helpful. In terms of which manuscripts, comparing manuscripts, collating manuscripts, I initially had thought that I would use the Marashi manuscript as my asl. Why? Because it's very old. It's from the same century as the writing of the book.
So mu'asir with the
not mu'asir, but maybe the next generation or the second generation of Radi, and it's been collated against. So we are told, against Radi's autograph manuscript. And there I have several manuscripts like that, though, that claim to have been collated against Radi's autograph manuscripts. So the Marashi manuscript is one of the oldest ones from the 5th century Hijri. So Nahj was written in 400 AH. Radi died in 406. So this is, from like 50 years after, or 70 years after. I decided, though, after kind of, exploring more manuscripts, getting more manuscripts, studying more manuscripts. So there's the Shahristani manuscript, the Nasiri manuscript, the others, Rampur Raza Library manuscript, the Yaqubi manuscript. The Yaqub manuscript is a century later, but it's copied from a very early manuscript that is collated against Radi's manuscript. So those were my 5 primary manuscripts, as I call them. Then I also, use 7 manuscripts. No, was it 7? 9. I'm terrible with numbers, so I mix up those things. But
don't worry.
But so a total of I think 14 manuscripts that I used. The secondary manuscripts I used for the particular 15 or 20 substantial variants that I then listed from the later ones as well. And also there were some folios missing in the primary manuscript, especially in the beginning. So I used the secondary manuscripts for those as well. But otherwise I relied mainly on the primary. Now, asl question. So initially I planned to use the Marashi manuscript as the asl because I thought it was the oldest manuscript, and also because many scholars had claimed Tabatabai. I mean, he has a whole, Abdulaziz Tabatabai has a very important article listing all the manuscripts of the Nahj al-Balagha and so on. Al-Mutabaqi min Makhtutat Nahj al-Balagha. And scholars had said this is the oldest, this is the most reliable. Now, as I looked further and more deeply into the other manuscripts, I found that they too were really old, precious, had eminent genealogies, and eminent scholars had kind of commented on those, the ones that I mentioned also, again saying this is the most important, this is the most reliable. And when I looked through the actual manuscripts, I found that actually it's hard to make that decision. I mean, the decision would be subjective. It's like this is better than that. All of these 5 are really, really important early manuscripts. So I decided not to use an asl. I mean, I initially had written it up as the Marashi asl. I redid it, and I chose to then foreground other readings. Again, one thing I should say is that, all of these are the earliest manuscripts. I mean, we're lucky we have these very early manuscripts of the Nahj, which enables us to give a very accurate critical edition.
From the 5th century, that's remarkable. Yeah. That is old.
So if you, or early 6th. And if you don't, barring us finding Radi's own autograph, right? This is, I think, the closest we can come to the original Radi manuscript. So I found that I needed to kind of select. So going back to what I was saying first, I think that we have a remarkably uniform presentation if you collate the early manuscripts. In the, let's say, 15-20 substantial variants that we have, there are some differences, right? So, but I chose not to not to foreground the Marashi only. I chose whichever reading was consistently used by the 5. So 4 out of 5. The other 4 were using something. I would say I would use that and then footnote the variant from Marashi. Versus if Marashi and Nasiri and Rampur Raza were using X, then I would use that in the matan. I also, utilized my own. So they were scholars, the scribes who were writing this, but so am I, in all humility. So I can also use my own knowledge and understanding of the literary context, of the historical context, and we're trying to read what's there, right, to kind of decide which is the best reading. And what the best reading is, you might disagree, but then I've footnoted the other readings, so I'm not just leaving it out there. And scribes can make mistakes when they're copying as well, right? So it's not that an old manuscript is infallible by any means.
So exciting. Tell us a little bit about the geographical distribution of these manuscripts and what that tells us about Muslim intellectual history, but specifically the Shi'i intellectual history as it pertains to the Nahj. Because manuscripts, their locations, their scribes, and the details found on them tell us a lot about what that text means to a community as well, right? So can you shed a little bit of light about taking us back, try to transport us back to the 5th, 6th, 7th century? Was the Nahj being used as a didactic or pedagogical text?
You know,
what can we discern from the study?
So on that last question first, I think, and speaking to the geographical spread as well, as the manuscripts are written in all parts of the Islamic empire. So we see manuscripts from Central Asia, from Iran, from Iraq. Wow. Many are in the Istanbul collection, the Topkapi and Sulaimaniye. Many have found their way to India. Many of the oldest manuscripts are in Rampur Raza or Aligarh, or you know. So manuscripts from the 6th, 7th centuries, early manuscripts, and then or later ones as well. The only place where we actually don't see manuscript production, I mentioned this in my talk last night, is Spain and North Africa. Is post-Fatimid. This is the Umayyad-influenced Spanish.
Makes sense.
Although, I mean, again, I found some writings and some evidence to suggest that Imam Ali's words were being quoted by scholars in Umayyad Andalus as well. So Ibn Abd Rabbi, for example, who's a very important medieval period anthologist, Al-Aqd al-Farid,
of course,
cites Imam Ali extensively in the Aqd as an exemplar.
Are any pieces from the Nahj found in the Aqd?
There are some. They are.
Excellent.
They are indeed. But without mention, I mean, so I can't remember dates. Again, as I said, I'm going to be asked to be excused on dates. But I think he's this around the same time as the Nahj, so he wouldn't be kind of quoting the Nahj anyway.
But there's
the
some
same pieces,
corresponding contents between the two.
There are corresponding contents, absolutely. But so coming back then to the geographical spread, I mean, we can see, and Hassan Ansari has done some excellent work on manuscripts of Nahj al-Balagha. And I think a couple of his articles, which are in Farsi, kind of show that in Khorasan and in Yemen, very early, Sunnis were transcribing the Nahj al-Balagha very often. So these are, we can examine the manuscripts to kind of determine that provenance as well. And it tells us that this was not, considered a Shi'i text. It was considered a treasure of the Arabic Islamic library from very early on.
That is a fascinating discovery. I think it's so critically important to understand that these early texts, although today they're seen in some sense as being Shi'i, whatever that even means. I mean, that itself is a word that very much needs to be unpacked as to what is conveyed by that word. But today it's seen in that way, but history tells us a different story, in terms of how it was received and how it was used, despite some of its contents obviously being of a very, pro-Alid provenance of what Sharif al-Radi included in there. Moving forward in the discussion about the Nahj, reminds me, the pedagogical and didactic, do we know anything about its usage in madaris, in schools, like in religious schools, or was it used as a text of teaching Arabic, or in learning about Imam Ali, or about his in religious schools? So sometimes the manuscripts will have like
Yeah.
Qira'at or ijazat or things like that.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the key point here. Again,
and across, both Sunni and Sunni and Shi'i paradigm. Yeah.
Correct. So I think that, a deep history of the reception remains to be written. I mean, a lot of work has been done on Nahj al-Balagha in Arabic, in Persian, in Urdu, in many different languages, very little in English or in Western languages. But I think that, a deep reception history, a universal reception history needs to be written. And this is also a project that will require decades of work. I mean, so I mentioned Hassan Sari's work. He's a learned man and he's done some very focused, very good work. We need focused studies, but then also someone to bring everything together. And I'm not that person, because my focus has been on the text itself.
Yeah.
But as you say, I've worked through these years with the manuscripts and with the commentaries.
Yeah.
So just by that, by working with those materials on a more surface level even, it's obvious and clear that the Nahj had a widespread engagement with communities across the Islamic world. The manuscripts have many, many ijazas, so you can kind of study those carefully to see which library had them, which madrasa had them, which scholar studied them. The commentaries, again, people were using these materials because they were continuing to comment. And it's like there are 200 or more, 250 commentaries on the Nahj, medieval and modern. And then if we come to the kind of early modern times, we have Sheikh Muhammad Abdu saying that, if anyone wants to study Arabic or learn or acquire the gems of Arabic, you have to memorize Nahj al-Balagha, right? If you want to kind of get deep into Islamic wisdom, you have to memorize and study the Nahj al-Balagha. So this is, again, in Al-Azhar, the Mufti and so a Sunni reformist, and incidentally, Muhammad Abdu was very influential in East Asia.
Yep.
And therefore, through his edition or his commentary on Nahj al-Balagha really spread in East Asia as well as an important text during his time and after that.
Amazing.
But I hope someone takes up this study. There's so much to be done, and many of us need to come together to work on.
Of course. I mean, if we think of the great books of human civilization and religions, Nahj al-Balagha ranks as one of them. So it certainly deserves that kind of deep intellectual treatment, prolonged, sustained intellectual treatment and engagement. Let's move to the text itself now.
Okay.
The actual kalam, the words. Describe for us in general its structure of the Nahj, because we know, of course, there's different kinds of material within the text. Does Sharif al-Radi give us an idea of why he put it together this way, first of all, and then second of all, if someone was to open it, what would they encounter? Just staying for now on the organization of the book, and then I'll ask you about the contents a little bit more.
So Sharif Radi, this was one of the last of his works, and he tells us in his introduction that in his youth he started to write a book on khasa'is al-a'imma, the characteristics and lives of the imams. And he wrote the part on Imam Ali, and it's extant, we still have it. And then things got in the way, life got in the way, and he never completed it. But then within that part on Ali, he had a section at the end on the hikam, on the wise sayings, short sayings of Ali. And when he shared it with his friends, they were amazed, he says, and marveled at these materials and encouraged him to collect the longer parts, longer materials as well, and put them together in an anthology. Now, Sharif Radi, as you know, and as many of our viewers may know, was an eminent scholar. He was an eminent personage in the Abbasid Buyid political sphere as well. He was the Naqib al-Ashraf in Baghdad. And he has many important books on the Quran.
And then Naqib al-Ashraf is the chief or the head of the descendants of the Prophet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. And he wrote, Al-Majazat al-Nabawiyya.
Yep.
He wrote 2 books on the Quran, on metaphorical beautiful aspects of the Quran, among other things. And he has a host of works that he wrote on literary and also some theological issues. But then when he comes to the Nahj al-Balagha, he tells us that, his friends encouraged him to put together an anthology of Amir al-Mu'mineen's words. And he thought that, he would center it on eloquence. And he tells us about the wisdom in Amir al-Mu'mineen's words and the eloquence in Amir al-Mu'mineen's words, which in his view and in mine, I agree with him, surpassed anything else that we have. So he decided then, he tells us again about his organization. Now, it's important to remember that this is not put forward as a book of hadith or a legal dicta or even doctrine in a way. I mean, although it contains all of these things, it contains doctrine. We'll come to the contents momentarily. But his focus was on balagha, and he calls it Nahj al-Balagha, the way of eloquence, right? And so he said, and he organized it by genre, again, which was the way of literary anthologies, where the genre is kind of foregrounded versus themes. So, and he said about collecting, so he kind of said, I'm going to do this in 3 big chapters: khutbah, oration; risala, epistle or letter; and hikmah, wise sayings or maxims. And there are other genres, he said, like dua, supplications, questions and answers, other kinds of counsel. And he said, I'm going to put those in the one of the 3 big chapters wherever it fits best. So kind of that, he explains his organizational principle like that. And then within each chapter, and the khutbah genre is the most robust, it's the biggest and the most robust, again, mainly because that's the main genre of the time. He, transcribed texts as he found them and chose them.
Yeah.
So they're not in a particular thematic order or chronological order at all. They're random in that sense. The organization is ad hoc, and he starts a text by saying, وَمِنْ خُطْبَةٍ لَهُ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. Among Ali's orations is the following. That's his kind of usual line introducing a text. Then he has the text, which is usually an excerpt and not the entire text. In my edition, so I went back to do 2 things, many things, but these are the 2 things I want to talk about right now in this context. I went back to, I put together an appendix of sources for the Nahj al-Balagha, and Tynan Kelly, who's my former graduate student, was my research assistant in this, mashkouran. And so we have a 50-page appendix of sources for Nahj al-Balagha. On the masadir. But not necessarily masadir even. So the thing is, masadir is a tricky word to use because it implies that Radi, that's his masadir, that's his source. And again, more work needs to be done to check that. I've done some work because I have a sense of, this, for example, the Gharib section is actually taken out of Abu Ubaid's Gharib al-Hadith. It's the same.
So tracing it to earlier pre-Nahj sources.
Pre-Nahj, but also afterwards. Because again, and some of them come with different lineages. Some of them are copied from Nahj, but they also...
And do some of them have isnads?
Many of them have isnads. The historical texts all have isnads, right? Radi doesn't, but the same text in Waqat Siffin by Al-Minqari, for example, has a full isnad. And the full historical context and so on. So coming to the point we were talking about, I went through all of these texts, let's say each text by text in all of the various sources quickly to find context. And I footnoted that context wherever I was able to find it.
And then of course doing that further would be an entire separate book.
That would be a book,
many books.
We need it, we need not just one more scholar, but
my late teacher, Sayyid Muhammad Hussein al-Husseini al-Jalali, who is peace be upon his departed soul. He wrote a work called Musnad Nahj al-Balagha that he put together some many years ago. And I remember, I think it's in 3 or 4 volumes, and it's not complete, but in 3 or 4 volumes, just on trying to find the various khutub or sermons and rasail that have an isnad for it. So either later or earlier, and that's just a drop in the bucket. I mean, that's just a drop in the sea of the scholarship on this, and that is waiting to be written. That's a whole genre of literature on its own, isn't it?
Even just one text, or a handful of texts, that deep research still needs to be done on kind of finding that text and kind of studying the isnad, studying the context, studying the provenance of each khutbah. So here's another thing that I think if researchers are actually going to take this forward, and I very much hope they will, there are some texts in Nahj al-Balagha that are variants of this. I mean, they're variants of the same event, most likely. And Radi is aware of this. He's self-aware. He says that I've transcribed this same khutbah earlier, but this one comes with different language, some variants, and it's beautiful, the variants too. So I wanted to transcribe the next one. So now the thing is, and again, this is a long discussion beyond the scope of today's interview, but because of the orality, we have different, slightly different renderings in the various different texts. In fact, the fact that we have these slightly different renderings strengthens the case for authenticity rather than the opposite, I think. And it's memory variants that we have, not transcription variants.
And it demonstrates to us the cultural and civilizational memory of the Muslim Ummah, or what would be the Muslim community in their recollection, absorption, and carrying of the words of Ali. And even if there are differences, it just points out how important of a historical figure he was. Vitally important, regardless of someone's madhab or school of thought.
But he was important to all madhab of Islam.
Regardless. I mean, he was just such a universally important figure. Now, shifting to the content, how does Ali describe himself in the Nahj? Can you give us an example?
Oh, there are many, many examples, but I'll try to think of a couple that are that come to immediately to mind. And he talks about himself in his childhood with the Prophet Muhammad, for example.
Okay.
And he tells us in moving detail, and this is within khutbahs that he's, the context is also important. So Muawiyah is, accusing him of all kinds of terrible things and bad intentions and so on, and of going against the Prophet and so on. And Ali says, "Why? I was the first who believed in him, who gave him my pledge. I grew up with him. He was my murabbi. He brought me up. I slept with him in his blanket.
Yes.
I was close to him when revelation came to him. I heard every word that Gabriel spoke to him. He would chew a morsel of food and put it in my mouth. So he has that, he gives us in very great detail that aspect even of his,
And I believe he says, if I'm not, maybe in that khutbah he says, سَمِعْتُ رِنَّةَ شَيْطَان, right? Or he heard the scream or the cry of Satan when the revelation would come to the Prophet, which was quite remarkable because it, almost he is saying here, at least as Radi has included in the Nahj, that he, unlike anyone else, perhaps was a witness to revelation as it is written there, right? Which is something quite remarkable. So is he almost telling, in a sense, some details could be derived as to his version as presented there of the beginning of Revelation, or some of the stories, not the beginning, but of what Revelation was like even, or how it was experienced by the Prophet, or what his position was in that regard to make the claim that I can hear or heard the cry or the scream of Satan.
Right. No, absolutely. I think one could go in you know.
And what Radiya had intended by including that, and what that might even indicate in terms of ideas about the place of Ali vis-a-vis his access to these unseen realms, as presented there, or at least as could be opined or extracted later on in commentaries.
And among the Shia, I mean, there's that accepted belief that Ali is the Quran an-Natiq. He's the Tarjuman al-Quran. He's the speaking Quran. He's the interpreter of the Quran. But within all the Sunni madhabs also, I mean, this hadith is a mutawatir, prevalent one, that Ana Madinatul Ilmi wa Aliun Babuha. I am the city of knowledge, the Prophet Muhammad says, and Ali is its gateway. So, I mean, everybody is together on this, whether you're Shi'i or Tafdili Sunni or not, whether you're a Sunni. That Ali has a very special status with regard to knowledge, divine knowledge, that is given to him by the Prophet Muhammad. I mean, another thing that just to kind of add maybe two things to the answer about Ali's presentation of himself. And this is now, I talked about what he says about his early life, but then there's also a passage in the Nahj al-Balagha where Ali talks about his ghusl of the Prophet. And he says, I was the one who undertook the washing of the Prophet's holy body. And I was present when hosts of angels came, prayed benedictions on the Prophet and left, and another host came and left, and so on. So there's this other very, very lovely passage there as well. And then on shifting to yet a different mode, but again, all of these things are connected in terms of how Ali presents himself. He says, Ana ala al-haq, I am righteous. I am truthful. I am truly the rightful successor. That's how he presents himself, of the Prophet Muhammad. And even if I'm the only one standing on my side, if everybody else is against me, I am still ala haq. So it kind of, his conviction, you know.
And these are found in the Nahj.
These are found in the Nahj al-Balagha. But similar things are also found so for example, in the Mi'at Kalima that is attributed to the compilation of the Abbasid Sunni literature, famous literature, Al-Jahid. And one of the earliest kind of kalimat, so sayings within that Mi'at Kalima compilation is, لو كشف الغطاء ما ازددت يقينا. If the veil were removed, i.e. of the body at the time of death, my conviction
will not go up,
will not increase, because I already see al-akhirah and its ma'alim in front of me.
And you've translated that with the Library of Arabic Literature.
That's
book,
right.
Right. Which is available. How does the Nahj present history of the imama or the khilafah? Interesting to see this. How is the early period of Islam, as tumultuous as it was, presented in the Nahj? Is there anything in the Nahj which gives an indication about some of the early events of history that obviously, caused a commotion, so to speak? In the early generations.
No, there's a lot, and there's a lot, especially about Ali's caliphate.
Okay.
Not about the earlier times. So, most of the khutbahs and the letters and the materials from the Nahj, I mean, just to put a number there, it's like 98% or something, is from during his caliphate and about that time, directly relevant to that time. It does refer back to earlier times as well, but so in terms of the history of the period and of Ali, we have a very direct window, especially if you consider that if you think that a lot of the materials are genuine, in some form that actually can be traced back to Ali, then it gives you a direct window into the events in his life. And so what's really important is that, historical works like Minqari's work, for example, in the narrative section, talk about what happened in Siffin. This person came to Muawiyah, he sent him back to, all of those kinds of narratives are there. But what you get that's very special in the Nahj al-Balagha and in the khutbahs more generally and in the letters more generally is that you get Ali's perspective. His personal thoughts on what's happening on a certain person, on, he has letters and you have the chronological progression that first when he's trying to persuade Muawiyah to do the right thing and give the bay'ah, there's a different tone. And then Muawiyah writes back with a lot of abuse and insults. Yeah. And so the tone ratchets up, right? I was like, and then becomes more harsh and threatening. And it's like, okay, now you need, that kind of, and it's response to the accusations in the letters, and there's back and forth in there as well. So it gives you a very nuanced feel versus a very flat view of the history of, okay, this happened, then that happened, then that happened. Yeah. That's a very flat view. And of course, those things happened, right? But then you kind of get it, but nothing is black and white, right? So again, if you look at the Battle of the Camel and so Talha and Zubayr were people that Ali had grown up with, that he knew, he was related to, and they had all been together in kind of creating the community of Islam in the earliest stages, and now they're on the opposite side of the battlefield and they're drawing swords against Ali. So what happened? Yeah. But then, so you can see that, right, in the materials, in the khutbah materials. Yeah. Right. And then the difference between Talha and Zubayr also. So for example, there's one very, very kind of striking image where Ali says, I think to Abdullah ibn Abbas, when he's sending, just before, this is on the battlefield now, before the battle commences, Ali is trying hard to persuade them not to fight. I mean, this is still the very, very end. In Jamal, in Siffin, in Nahrawan, the hope is that we can amicably sort this out, right? So he sends, this is now the last-ditch effort, he sends Abdullah ibn Abbas to talk to the other side, the leaders of the other side. And he says, don't talk with Talha, because you will find him a bull with a pointed horn, something like that. Wow. Right? Talk to Zubayr. He's softer, he's alien, and you may be able to persuade him.
Amazing. And to that effect, I, for years, have been so interested in a quotation of Marshall Hodgson, not a quotation, but an excerpt from The Venture of Islam, as you know, is a timeless work almost, in some senses, on Islamic history, where Hodgson says, and I'm quoting, Ali would become an appropriate figure around which to rally those who would protest the logic of events and against the injustices of a government that mistreated the trust of the Muslims. From very early, the story of Ali came to be known as that of a noble man ruined by the inconstancy and inconsistency of those who claim to be his friends. I'm rewording this somewhat. As much as by the deep-rooted malice of his enemies, and finally he was a victim of brute force and violence, which we must inexplicably confront in Islamic history. Yeah. Would you agree with Hodgson's?
The only word I don't like is the word ruined. Yeah. But so I speak about that and come back to the rest of it in a minute, because I agree with
based
a lot
on
of
all the your years of reading the words of about the life of Ali and the words of Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Yeah. I mean, so certainly his followers let him down. I mean, it wasn't just the opponents, from Syria and from Medina and so on. It was his own people kind of let him down and refused to stand up and fight for the truth and so on, as he urged them to do. But, whether one is successful or unsuccessful depends on your definition of success.
Okay.
Okay. And for Ali, being successful was not having a lot of money or a lot of power, or even having everybody agree with you, or having no fights or no rebellions in your realm for 20 years, right? success was gauged on how you conducted yourself. It wasn't whether you won the battle, it was how you conducted yourself during the battle.
That's the difference, right?
So
it's not really governed on this realpolitik.
No, not according to Ali, right? And he tells us again and again and again, that, I mean, the caliphate is nothing to me. I only do it because God made it incumbent upon the learned to guide. And it is my amana, the trust that I have to fulfill. And once, so he's asked, according to the historical sources, Muawiyah, was very shrewd. He used the treasury money to buy allegiances and all kinds of various things that, you allude, I think Hodgson maybe alludes to in terms of the injustices and corruption and so on of the period. And among the folks who considered or put themselves up as the Khalifa, so Muawiyah is a prime example here. But Ali says, so he's urged by some of his followers, like, you should take a page from Muawiyah and start, getting people's allegiances to you. Don't be so black and white in terms of, how you deal with the corrupt. And he said, لولا الدين لكنت أدهى من معاوية. So if it were not for religion, I would be more cunning than Muawiyah. I know how to do it, but I won't, right? I'm going to do the right thing no matter what. And that's, so the ends don't just justify the means. You can't achieve something right by doing a wrong.
Principled response. And just to wrap up, as much as we are students of history and intellectual history, do you feel that the person of Ali ibn Abi Talib has relevance? Well, I'm sure you do, but I guess the question would be, how would he be relevant to human civilization today, to the world in general?
And that's a great point, and that's a great point to end with.
Regardless of religion, regardless of creed, just how would he be relevant to humanity today?
Yeah. I gave a talk at the University of Chicago that was hosted by the Hyde Park Institute of Virtue and Character some years ago. And this was not in Islamic studies milieu. Yeah. It was in a very general humanistic institute that promotes on campuses the cultivation of virtue and character. So the idea is that you're not studying, going to college just to learn how to, theories of economics and history, but that it's about making yourself a better person, which I was part of that institute. I completely agree with their very noble agenda. But in any case, so the audience there was there were some Muslims there and maybe some Shia Muslims, some Sunni Muslims, but the vast majority of the audience was neither. They were not Muslims. And some were people of faith in Christianity and Judaism, but there were others who were perhaps even agnostic. But so, the thing that touched, I think, them all, I'm hopeful, and from the response I got, was just the depth of wisdom that can be a source of guidance for all human beings in terms of living a good life, in terms of being kind and compassionate and just, and helping others, in kind of prioritizing reason, all of these very, very important things. And one gentleman came up to me after the talk, and again, he had never heard of Ali before the presentation, before reading these materials, and he said, "Oh, I love Ali, I love this man." And that was such a reward for me, because I felt that I had gotten across, the intimate, the teachings of Ali that speak to each individual on a very personal level. So I think that for all humans, this book is very precious to Shia, but also to Sunni Muslims, to all Muslims, but it also is a wonderful source of wisdom, an eloquent wisdom for all human beings.
Thank you, Professor Qutbuddin, for your time today. And thank you to all those listeners and viewers that have joined us this far. Check us out at shiaresearch.ca. Once again, you can find us on YouTube, on Instagram, various social media platforms. And if you like these interviews, and there are other programs, do consider supporting the Shia Research Institute. Thank you very much. And once again, Doctor, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.